Lillian Hawthorne was the only daughter of Master Silas Hawthorne, and she lived a life gilded in deep, unforgiving silence. The Hawthorne Manor was a mausoleum of privilege, its marble cold, its portraits demanding. Lillian was trained for grace and obedience, taught to see the world as neatly divided into those who commanded and those who served, but every morning before the dew had burned off the cane fields this comfortable lie was shattered. The manor's silence wasn't peace. It was the quiet between hammer blows, a vast, echoing space where morality was suffocated by wealth. Lillian's days were a performance, arranging flowers, practicing music, receiving callers, each act a fresh layer of insulation against the reality of the fields. But the reality always seeped in. It happened in the courtyard where her father enacted his grim, ritualistic display of dominance. The focus of this ritual was Cale. Cale was a man defined by a resilience that refused to be broken, an unspoken defiance that only grew sharper with every passing season. He was the property Master Hawthorne needed to break but never could, and thus he became the symbol of unyielding will. His presence was a stark rebuke to the decadence of the house. Even when bent under the heat, his form held a geometric integrity, a refusal to collapse into despair. Lillian interpreted this not as resistance to the master, but as a commitment to his own identity. Lillian, hidden behind the lace curtains of her bedroom, could not look away. She never saw the whip touch the skin. Her father ensured the spectacle was heard, not seen, its sharp sound a percussive beat on the silence of the morning. But she saw Cale's face in the moments before and after. She saw the tightening of his jaw, the straightness of his spine, the way his eyes looked at nothing and yet seemed to see everything. She saw the humanity her world insisted did not exist. This forbidden observation was the first twist. It was a searing realization that the man her father sought to humiliate was, in fact, the most honorable person on the entire estate. Her shame was immense, not for the cruelty, which was her inheritance, but for her quiet complicity in watching it. Cale was an artist with his hands, a master carpenter by trade. He crafted the elegant furniture in the manor, the heavy mahogany desks, the delicate inlaid boxes. His hands, though scarred by labor, moved with the precision of a clockmaker. The workshop, smelling of turpentine and rich sawdust, became their only neutral ground. Her visits were clandestine affairs, justified by the pretense of her delicate needs. She lingered, watching the way he chose his tools, the deliberate, almost meditative quality of his work. She saw the true weight of his intelligence in the careful measurement, the correction of flaws in the raw wood, transforming imperfection into durable beauty. Lillian began visiting the workshop under the pretext of needing a small box for her ribbons. She would talk about the wood, the warmth of cherry, the cold permanence of oak. They never spoke of the beatings, nor of love. Their conversation was a shared, abstract language of grain and joinery. She commissioned a jewelry box. Her father's style was heavy, grotesque opulence. Lillian asked for simplicity, unadorned, clean lines, and a secret compartment so flawless it would look like solid wood. This request was the second profound twist. It was her way of communicating a desire for hidden truths, for a life stripped of her father's loud, corrupting wealth. The request for the jewelry box was her deepest confession. She described the secret compartment not as a novelty, but as a necessity, a place to hide things that mattered most, things the world would surely destroy if they were exposed. Cale understood. He built the box like a manifesto, a perfect, quiet beauty that mocked the manor's vulgarity. The final piece stood as a mute testament to their shared, subversive understanding. Lillian's silent acts became bolder. She started leaving small, impossible gifts near his workstation, a rare, perfectly sharp tool stolen from her father's locked cabinet, a piece of hard, forbidden candy. Once, a clean, folded handkerchief. He never acknowledged the items directly, but the change in their dynamic was palpable. Cale began to look at her, a glance so fleeting and intense it could stop her breath. It was not gratitude she saw, but a desperate, terrifying hope. Then came the third twist, Cale testing the depth of her resolve. When she stopped by the workshop one blistering afternoon, he stood behind the massive, unfinished dining table, his expression grave. He asked her without preamble to bring him the small brass key her father used to lock the north gate to the orchards, a key never used, a key that represented a forgotten path to freedom. It is not for escape, Cale whispered, his eyes demanding honesty. It is a key for a door I wish to see opened only for a moment. He explained that the key had no value for escape. It was merely a symbol of access. It is not the door I need opened, he stated, his voice low and intense, but the recognition in your soul that you can turn the lock on the life you lead. He was asking her to perform an act of personal political insurrection, staking her moral worth against her inherited fear. Lillian knew the immense risk. She spent 3 days wrestling with fear, but the shame of her silence was greater. She stole the key and placed it beneath a loose plank in the workshop floor. The weight of that small brass object, once placed in the hiding spot, felt heavier than any gold. Her action was final. She had crossed the line and could never return to her father's clean world. Master Hawthorne, a man whose entire universe was governed by ledgers and suspicion, was not blind. He noticed Cale's increasingly focused work, the lack of rebellion in the man's posture despite the unrelenting morning rituals. He also noticed Lillian's strange stillness, the way she seemed to be watching the shadows, waiting for something. The fourth twist was the trap her father set. Master Hawthorne approached Cale not with a whip but with a promise. He offered Cale a position as foreman on a distant, less used Hawthorne property, a reprieve from the daily humiliation, a place of safety. The only price. Cale had to explain the recent change in Lillian's demeanor and what exactly she had entrusted him to do. Master Hawthorne began to observe Lillian with a chilling intensity, treating her less like a daughter and more like a potentially compromised asset. He would test her, dropping leading remarks about the loyalty of certain individuals or praising the necessity of constant vigilance. Cale looked at the master, then at the distant horizon of the fields, and silently refused. He knew accepting the bribe would corrupt his only source of true dignity, the secret purity of his bond with Lillian. His refusal earned him a savage, protracted public whipping the next morning, a brutal escalation that served as a loud, terrifying warning to Lillian. The screams she heard that morning were meant to serve as her wedding bell, sealing her obedience through fear. The cruelty of her father's act pushed Lillian to a choice. The fifth twist arrived in the form of Mr. Davies, a wealthy suitor from Charleston, a man whose arrogance perfectly mirrored her father's own. The dinner was a suffocating ceremony of their combined entitlement. The master announced the engagement at a grand dinner. Lillian, a woman trained for silence, stood up and, in a clear voice that cut through the polite murmur of the guests, refused the suitor. She did not give a reason, merely stating, "I cannot marry a man whose values are built upon walls." Her refusal hit her father like a physical blow, silencing the hall instantly. She shattered her future. In one sentence, her father, stunned by the unprecedented public rejection, dragged her, furious and humiliated, and locked her in her room, a prison of gilded cage bars. In her isolation, Lillian prepared for escape. She had failed to free Cale through diplomacy or purchase. Now she would free him by joining his risk. She found the sixth twist slipped beneath her locked door. A small, exquisitely carved wooden bird, a mourning dove with its wings slightly chipped. The little wooden dove was a masterpiece of restraint. Its wings were chipped, signifying the impossibility of an easy flight, but the carving itself showed a delicate, almost heartbreaking detail. It was Cale's signal. On its underside, scratched so fine it was almost invisible, was a single time and place the abandoned well at the edge of the property, and the single shocking word, "Stay." Cale's message was clear. He was leaving, and he wanted her to remain safe. He would not allow her sacrifice to become his burden. He understood that her greatest power was not in running, but in surviving and disrupting her father's lineage. Lillian decided to defy him. She would flee, she would meet him, and they would be free together. She dressed in dark clothes, took only the essential money she had saved, and waited for the clock to strike midnight. But the seventh twist was cruel, sudden, and devastating. Around 11 o'clock, a terrible commotion erupted downstairs. Master Silas Hawthorne, a man who believed himself immune to all human weakness, was violently struck by a sudden, virulent sickness. He was dying, and rapidly. The doctors whispered Latin phrases of futility. Lillian was immediately released from her room, thrown into the chaos of servants and panicked doctors who could do nothing but watch the master fail. Lillian stood by her father's massive four-poster bed. The man who had commanded absolute order now struggled for a single breath. The hour for Cale's flight passed. She watched her father's power drain out of him. The man who had ritualistically broken others was finally, utterly broken himself. She waited. Lillian watched the spectacle. With a terrifying composure, she stood at the precipice of her two lives, the life of freedom that Cale was claiming, and the life of power that was being thrust upon her. The choice was not about love, but about how the power of Hawthorne Manor would die. The clock struck 2. Master Hawthorne took his last ragged breath, and the oppressive silence of the manor returned, heavier than before. Lillian was no longer the daughter. She was the sole, immediate heir, the new master of all the Hawthorne property. This was the eighth twist, a sudden terrifying elevation to the very power she had sought to reject. Lillian did not weep, she did not panic. Instead, she took the heavy iron key from her dead father's hand, went to his study, and unlocked the safe hidden behind the painting of the first Hawthorne patriarch. Inside were deeds, titles, and bills of sale. She found Cale's papers, the document that defined him as property. Cale was gone. She knew it. He would have left precisely at the appointed time, believing she had stayed for safety, as he had commanded. Lillian sat at the desk, the velvet-lined room suddenly suffocating. Her mind grasped the ultimate act of revenge, burning the documents, dismantling the estate, using her power to grant immediate freedom, but she was not blinded by emotion. She understood the true, cold nature of the system. Immediate, unmanaged freedom would lead to chaos, starvation, and recapture for those who remained. Her father's world was a cruel cage, but without a plan, opening the doors would lead to certain death for many. The ninth twist was the act that became the town's darkest legend. Lillian took Cale's paper, the paper that named him, and signed it, granting him personal freedom. She then wrote a new document. The act was swift and ruthless in its planning. Using her legal authority as the new head of the estate, she meticulously bound the entire Hawthorne fortune and all its assets to a single explosive clause. Upon her death, every person currently held on the plantation would be freed, given a parcel of land, and provided with basic sustenance to start their lives. She did not free them now, but guaranteed their ultimate, structured freedom from the grave. This document was her true masterpiece, the secret compartment to the entire estate. It was designed not only to free the people but to destroy the economic viability of the land for any future, entitled relative. She used the power of ownership to destroy ownership itself. She sealed the document, hid it deep within the walls of the manor, and then took command of the estate. The town watched, bewildered. Lillian ruled with unnerving fairness. The daily whippings ceased immediately, replaced by fair but demanding labor. Lillian's rule was a long, cold penance. She never once allowed herself the luxury of warmth or affection. She lived in the large, echoing house, an isolated queen whose only focus was maintaining the rigid stability necessary to ensure her final will could not be overturned. Her life was the price of collective future freedom. She never smiled, never married. She was cold, precise, and meticulous, running the plantation like an efficient, joyless enterprise. The townsfolk whispered that she had been tainted by her father's evil, that she was a master more terrible than the last because she wielded her power with such cold, moral clarity. They said the new master had been corrupted by the old, trading her soul for the land. This was the dark legend, the daughter who stayed to perpetuate the horror. But Cale knew the truth. Months later, he received his freedom papers, delivered by an anonymous lawyer who merely stated, "The master died. You are free." Cale did not return. He used his craft to build a life far away, a life of quiet dignity. But he never forgot the woman who had traded her freedom for a future she knew she could not live to see. The final, climactic twist, the quiet revenge, happened 20 years later. Lillian Hawthorne died, alone and childless, in the cold manor. The town prepared for the predictable inheritance squabble among distant relatives. But Cale, now an aging, respected craftsman, returned. He was the only one who knew where to look. Cale's return was a quiet invasion of the dusty, forgotten place. He moved through the manor like a ghost, an outsider who held the deepest secret of the family it housed. He entered the dusty, silent manor. He did not claim the land or the wealth. He went to the study, to the hole in the wall, and retrieved the sealed document. He found the hiding spot with the ease of an expert, his fingers tracing the wood he himself had prepared decades ago. He read the precise legal language of her final will. The reading of the will was his final moment with her, an intellectual communion across the divide of death. It was done. Her life had been a 20-year act of penance, an agonizing period of command used only to ensure the safe, organized dissolution of the system she hated. Cale presented the document to the shocked town magistrate. The will was ironclad. The people were freed. The Hawthorne Empire, the source of so much pain, was legally dismantled, its wealth repurposed to serve the future of the people it had once held captive. Cale's gaze was the only eulogy Lillian received. He had escaped. She had secured the moral victory. He took nothing from the ruins of the plantation but the memory of the woman who chose not to flee to freedom with him, but to stay and defeat her father's legacy from the throne of his own grave. The town never understood the act. They only knew the legend, that on the night the master died, his daughter made a dark pact with the devil to command his terrible empire. They never realized she had made a pact with justice instead.